to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidire, and we're going to be having a hashtag Africa Focus feature. As part of the show, we focus on the biggest stories on the African continent, and there's one that's sparking a lot of attention. Ghana, they've began documenting financial losses suffered by their citizens during recent anti-foreigner violence, anti-migrant protests here in South Africa. This is as they prepare to pursue legal and diplomatic compensation. So essentially, Ghana wants South Africa to pay for their citizens who they've repatriated and who say, well, they've lost out on businesses and they have some assets that they've left here in South Africa. And Ghana has become the second African country to do so, this after Nigeria, as I mentioned, to seek repatriation from South Africa over some of the effects of their displaced citizens and the damage to businesses, property, and livelihoods here in South Africa. Ghana's Foreign Affairs Minister, Samuel Ukuzeto Ablakwa, said the government is creating an official register. This is to record claims from citizens who lost businesses, investments, or property during the anti-migrant protests here in South Africa. The move is going to be an interesting one because South Africa has come out and rejected calls for blanket compensation. South Africa, DIRCO, has come out saying claims must follow the country's legal processes and must be supported by verifiable evidence. The government has also condemned anti-foreigner violence, describing the attacks as criminal acts rather than state policy, and has pledged to investigate those that are responsible. So we're going to be having an interesting conversation around all of this, and I think most importantly, try and get insight on how all of this is being viewed, particularly in Ghana. And we're going to be having a conversation with Ghanaian social activist, political economist, and former head of the political economy unit at Third World Network Africa, Brother Jerchi Tanoh, who's joining us via virtual platform from Ghana. Brother Jerchi, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you very much, congratulations for continuing this important discussion.
No, pleasure is all ours. Pleasure is all ours, and I think it's very, very important to have, and it's very, very important for I think the citizens of the different countries to try and understand the feel around this conversation from each other, and that's why I want to begin this conversation from a Ghanaian point of view. Seeing this announcement from the Ghanaian government saying they've begun documenting the losses that have been suffered by some of their citizens here in South Africa during those anti-migrant protests. What's your analysis of the issue from a Ghanaian's point of view? What does this development mean for you guys?
Well, I think that the first thing to say is that the South African government bears a lot of responsibility for what has happened and what continues to happen. It has dog-whistled the issue of migrants. It has tried to talk about illegal migration. It has conducted checks in workplaces. In a sense, it has promoted the narrative and the practice enforced by state agencies, including the police and immigration and so on and so forth, of saying who is acceptable and who is not acceptable within South Africa and within the African continent. Okay, I mean, there's in that sense, it has encouraged, it has legitimized the kinds of narratives that we see is being employed by the outright, more overtly xenophobic organizations and tendencies that are emerging dangerously for South Africans, for the rest of Africans, for ordinary people everywhere. So there's no question the South African government bears a great deal of responsibility. But I think that in terms of Ghana, the Ghanaian government's claim, well, whatever claims that it is issuing about compensation and so on and so forth, we should take that in a bit more critical light. Okay, I mean, first and foremost, we are already in an age where international relations, interstate relations are a lot more transactional. We all know that. Look at Donald Trump, for example. Okay, so I'm not too sure that this will go that far in terms of radically changing diplomatic or other relations between Ghana and South Africa. What we are likely to see, if anything at all, beyond the rhetorical glory that the Ghanaian government will be seeking to bask in from its own citizens, what we're likely to see is that at the end of the day, there'll be some kind of bargain. Okay. Which has nothing to do with migrants or ordinary people. It could be something about sharing some trade or investment relation, mining, this, that, or the other, some contract. You never know. Okay, this is the age we're in. Okay. Secondly, we also have to make the point that the attacks on migrants, the ethnicization, the xenophobic treatment of ordinary people is not confined to South Africa. South Africa is a particularly extreme case in point. It shows a qualitatively new threat. But broadly speaking, that threat and that escalation comes from conditions which already exist across the world and across Africa itself. The Ghanaian government accepts people who have been, renditioned and expelled from the United States and so on, including other African and other global South migrants. It itself expels people from the Sahel, deports people from the Sahel who are supposed to be here under illegal conditions, even though we know of the war and other jihadi instability in the Sahel. It expels people from Nigeria and other parts of West Africa, even though we're all supposed to belong to the economic community of West African states, where there ought to be free movement and so on and so forth. So none of these governments whatsoever are innocent of the conduct, of the tendency to divide and blame innocent people and to deflect their responsibility in making people's lives difficult. Okay, South African government owes a lot of compensation and owes the responsibility of redistribution, not just to migrants, but to the people and the working people of South Africa itself. This is one of the most unequal countries in the world, perhaps the most unequal country in the world. There's a lot of wealth concentration. A lot of working people are homeless, as we see in the social movements. A lot of people are jobless, they are landless, and those who even have land and jobs are clinging onto those under the most precarious conditions. In no sense is that a justification for attacking people of another ethnicity, another nationality, and so on and so forth. In no sense does that justify the fact that there's a hierarchy of belonging. If you're a big foreign investor from anywhere in the world, you're a billionaire, millionaire, you are welcome in South Africa. If you are a poor person trying to struggle to earn a living or fleeing conditions, or indeed you are simply following the pattern through which apartheid accumulated wealth, which is to set up and exploit a differentiated migration regime, exploiting labor from across the region and from within South Africa itself, sending people back to homelands and so on and so forth. And that tendency has had consequences for the way in which economies around the region and elsewhere can survive. So the concentration of wealth in South Africa is not simply a question for South Africa itself. It's a question for the region. And those who are in South Africa who need to claim from the ruling class, from the 1%, from the rich, from the state, should join hands with other working people from elsewhere in Africa who are trying to do the same wherever they are, whether they are in South Africa, whether they are in their home countries or another third country. And I think that we shouldn't be invested too much in what governments and states do to and between each other. What we ought to do is to take a signal from what they're saying, to claim, to reverse it. The compensation that we need, the redress that we need, the redistribution that we need has to be won from the top of society, wherever we are, to the bottom of society, wherever we happen to be. The South African Constitution starts by saying South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Well, that is an important claim which we must enforce right now. And all who live in it must be all who live in it. They can't start making distinctions. But that same principle we must extend to every African country. We must extend across the world. Wherever people are, it is our labor that produces the wealth. It is us who produce the services. Without us, nothing can function. We should not allow those who are stealing from us, exploiting us, those who to continue to divide us as well. So the response really, in our understanding of what is happening, is to throw back, move away from the diplomatic shenanigans that are taking place to the kinds of solidarity that we can build between migrants and non-migrants wherever we are, and just as much base that on the capacity of ordinary people to take back the wealth that has been stolen from them, that is continuously exploited from them by ordinary people, by the elite in South Africa and elsewhere in Africa and in the world at large.
I want to, touch on a different aspect here and maybe just give you insight on how this situation is being viewed, at least by South Africans internally, how Ghana has been going about things. There's a general feeling that there's a bit of grandstanding from the Ghanaian government with regards to how they've been speaking of South Africa, it doesn't sound diplomatic. It doesn't look diplomatic. It sounds and looks like there's an attempt to make South Africa a pariah state on the African continent. It looks and feels like other African countries and those that can compete, like Nigeria, like Ghana, want to become the new destination of choice for foreign direct investment outside of South Africa, which for a very, very long time has been a gateway to the rest of the continent. What do you make of that analysis that there could have been a better way to go about things? How some of the Ghanaian diplomats speak of South Africa is very unpalatable. It lacks a bit of diplomacy, and also considering just how much diplomatic relations Ghana and South Africa have been enjoying for a very, very long time, it looks out of touch and out of character. At least that's how it is being viewed internally in South Africa. How do you view that analysis?
Well, views evolve, views develop, views change, and we ought to be this conversation ought to be part of enabling that process where views develop and evolve to. The first thing to say is that, again, I go back to my earlier comments. If we confine our views from the kind of narrative and the kind of conduct that is set out by our rulers, our elites, our exploiters, I think we will end up in a pretty difficult and unpalatable place. It is the South African government that is complicit in making South Africa a pariah across Africa, if that exists, to the degree that exists. That's the first responsibility. The second responsibility is that for the same reason, it will seek justification and seek to deflect by blaming others. And the Ghanaian government will do the same. That's the point I'm making. I'm saying that from the point of view of ethics, from a point of view of self-interest, I do not know that there's a qualitative difference between the behavior of Ghanaian diplomats and the Ghanaian government and the South African one. No, not at all. In fact, given the material reality of people who are being hounded, who are being brutalized, people who are being killed, let's go back to the brass tacks. In this specific instance, the first problem lies with the South African ruling class, the South African state, the South African political class who are seeking to mobilize. That's the fact. We have had instances in the past where South African diplomats have also spoken similar language. For example, the South African High Commissioner in Ghana, I remember in the last wave in 2018, 2019, made similar comments to what is now, the Ghanaian government is being, or Ghanaian officials are being, said to be doing at the moment. My point, though, is this. Our own views as ordinary citizens cannot start or end with what is being said there. Okay. Our job must be that if the only thing that is prior to us is that there has to be in our societies a small group of people who are unaccountable, who exploit us every day, who seek to control the way we think, control our views, and use that process of control to turn us against each other. That's our number one issue. I cannot start my life, my relationship with you, for example, or with your audience, according to the dictates of the Ghanaian government or the South African government. So our views must evolve. If we want a better world and a better way of living with each other, then our views cannot start or end with the minority interests, which have a vested interest occasionally, every so often, to cause a permanent interest, not occasionally, to cause division among us, except that occasionally it may take this form, it may take another form, and so on and so forth. There can be perfect diplomacy between the Ghana government and the South Africa government, which is perfect by the norms of every diplomatic convention, which involves, for example, investing in a mine, where foreign investors come from both Ghana and South Africa and join together peacefully, diplomatically, and that mine will pollute communities. It will evict people from their land, whether in Ghana or South Africa, as indeed does happen. That is far more of
Brother Jerchi, unfortunately, I have to let you go. Unfortunately, I have to let you go. We have run out of time, but I'll talk to my producer. You and I have to make some time to expand a bit on this conversation because it's very, very important. But thank you so much for joining us.
It's important, most of all, that ordinary people take the initiative of linking their lives and their fortunes and their future and their current security to those of other ordinary people like them, and forming our views accordingly in the best way that we can do so, and not take our lead from people who have no interest in our welfare, but are competing to, as you're saying, vaingloriously for their own interests. At the end of the day, we are the ones who suffer for it.